book 16 of 2020 was The 10 Types of Human by Dexter. So I listened to this book on Audible, and I haven't, before this book, actually read many audiobooks. Last year, like, I was on audiobooks all the time, and so this year I kind of decided to have a bit of a break from them, because I was literally listening to so many books and having to review and do all these kind of videos for them and stuff. So I was kind of like, I'll slow down a little bit this year. So this was kind of one that I'd seen for a while and thought it looked okay, it looked interesting, and it's one of those where the title doesn't tell you really anything about what the book is about, unfortunately, and the kind of blurb on it as well gave me an impression of it that wasn't the case. So the title kind of implies, or it did to me, that it was kind of going to discuss like 10 types of people in terms of like from a scientific vantage point of like what makes each type of person, and that's not really what the book's about. There's kind of like a lengthy discussion of individuals' experiences, with a slight allusion to some research. So it's not research focused, it's kind of like focused on human beings, on their individual experiences and their stories, and then kind of linking them into like a topic, and then kind of supporting it with a little bit of research, but not really that much. It's kind of, you know, stories of people from across the world, and it's kind of discussing kind of like human rights and in particular topics. So for example, like things like school shootings, like what kind of person would, or what type of person are you in that situation where you have to save another human being? Like, does it make a difference if, so this is like the Kinsman, does it make a difference if that person is related to you or not? And I kind of was a little bit underwhelmed by this kind of story, which it's quite, this book kind of meanders, so it flips back and forth between different stories and between different topics, and it's really kind of like there's no real structure to it. So it's not like sequential, and I quite like sequential books. So it's kind of like going back and forth all the time, and it's quite a long book. You know, it took a good 20 odd hours to listen to on audio. I think it was like 800 pages, so it's quite a long audio book to listen to. And so it would have benefited really from some kind of structure, but it's kind of meandering back and forth. So it comes back to this Kinsman a lot after it's spoken about other things. It kind of tries to tie them in, but it just feels a little bit like, oh, we're back to this story and talk about this story again. And it's kind of like, everyone knows about how in psychology there's a theory about altruism and that you will save people that you're genetically related to. Like, people know this already, so to kind of go back to it so many times, it was just a little bit like, why? That it seemed a little bit superfluous to do that. It talks about child trafficking and slavery, and around kind of Lake Volta, which is quite interesting actually, because I didn't know about Lake Volta before. So it was, the stories that are told kind of tell you about these topics, but because it's from like a first person experience, it really humanises it, and you actually feel like really bad about how these people's human rights are violated. And so it's quite successful in the way that it portrays that. Euthanasia and locked-in syndrome is another one that's discussed. Child soldiers and PTSD, and surprisingly how if a child soldier is more violent, they're protected from PTSD, which is interesting. Prison deaths from kind of restraining children, which kind of frames the narrative a tiny bit. I think that's another one that keeps, you know, being referred back to. And then female genital mutilation, and kind of almost like explaining why somebody who loves their child would do that because of the cultural issues. That one was really good at removing kind of ethnocentric bias, because obviously it is horrific from our vantage point of our culture, but for their culture to not do it means that they might be ostracising their culture, and so it kind of goes into a little bit of explanation about that, which doesn't really justify it, but it kind of gives it a little bit more of explanation of where they don't really have the choice of what to do, in kind of like a narrow kind of society. Not narrow, but like not as open to influence from external sources is what I was kind of referring to then. So it's really insightful. it does give various allusions to kind of anthropological, psychological, and like evolutionary kind of research. But like I mentioned before, it's briefly alluded to. You know, at one point it talks about kind of like the Goby fish, which are like fish that the place in the hierarchical structure that they are in terms of power is reflective of what size they are. So if a fish is too big and the Goby fish that's got more power than them is like not bigger than them, then that fish will starve itself so that it's not as big. And you know, so these fish like fast so that they're the right size, and the power structure is really interesting. That happened, and it made me think about just now. Like humans do that, don't they? They kind of like they fast to make themselves a certain size in comparison to others. Interesting, but obviously not in the same way. And so these kind of like 10 types of humans. We've mentioned the Kinsman. There's another one called the perceiver of pain, and there are others which, to be honest with you, right now I can't remember. And this is the bit that I was kind of disappointed by, because I assumed that these types would be like scientifically defined kind of, you know, types of people, but they're just kind of categories of the type of human that you might be in a certain instance. And so it was kind of more like Dias's way of categorizing how people behave rather than there actually being 10 types of human. So that kind of put me off, really, because, you know, what he's saying about it might not be true. Like, he's just kind of, you know, he's inferring this, but it might not actually be the case. And because of that meandering back and forth all the time, it made it very, very repetitive. And I kind of just thought, I just want to get rid of the fluff and just give me the facts and tell me what these 10 types are. But that's not what the book is like. The book is very fluffy. It's very kind of like more of a discussion, more of a kind of talking about people's stories. And obviously, if that's what your bag is, you'll really enjoy it. But for me, it was kind of not what I was after, so I gave it 2 stars.